Hey everybody, how's it going? Stoudman coming back at you, and if you can't already tell by my voice, I'm sick. I'm sick as a dog. Thinking it based upon what I was told by where it may have came from, that it might be whooping cough, or it might just be a really bad cold. Whatever the case is, coughing a lot, it is not comfortable. I feel really crappy. But I'm still doing these videos for you. I'm not going to let that stop me. You know what I mean? The show must go on, and I have plenty of cough drops to help out along the way. And don't worry, they are sugar-free. Just don't be too surprised if you notice a lot of cuts in these videos, because I am sick, so I'm going to lose my train of thought more frequently. I'm going to stop to have coughing fits more frequently. It's not going to be as professional or anything as you might be expecting. But either way, I want to get right into this, alright? So, as you well know, I watched all of these movies last week, and I had a blast watching the Universal Classic Monsters movies, and like I said, going back and checking out the movies that led to these. And then, I thought, well, if I'm going to watch these movies, maybe I should watch some of the remakes that were based on the Universal Classic Monsters. Now, some of these aren't necessarily intentionally based on the Universal Classic Monsters. They're just based on the same character that the Universal monsters were based on. So, just to clarify that right off the bat, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're a remake. They could be a reimagining of the same story. Either way, there were a lot of reimaginings and remakes done of the Universal Classic Monsters and of the characters that were originally imagined as the Universal Classic Monsters. In the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and yada yada yada. But in the 90s in particular, the 90s were a pretty big era for the remake of these movies. There were some that came a little bit before that, but for the most part, it was the 90s. That's when we started to see things like Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. A lot of people do not like this movie, and having recently watched it again on Blu-ray in the best possible quality, I kind of see where they're coming from. It's a little dull. I mean, I like the movie, and I think that it's well acted and well performed, and it's definitely engrossing enough, but something about it feels off. Something about it feels like it's just not getting the job done, per se. I mean, I feel like it's definitely about as scary as the original one was from Universal, at least. It's at least about as scary as that one, because that one wasn't like in modern terms, it's not necessarily a scary movie. It was scary back then, but it's not really scary now. When you watch this movie, I notice a lot of things from like the way that they talk about things, making references to Jack the Ripper and stuff like that. There's a hint of postmodernism in the way that this movie was made, and it doesn't really mix well with the theme that they're going with here, with this being an old tale coming from an old time. Anytime you see kind of a postmodern look at something that's basically got like a historical basis to it, or they're trying to convince you that this happened in the 1700s or 1800s, and the characters are acting like they're not from that time, it feels a little off, you know what I mean? Now, I'm not going to say that the acting was bad, because the acting, quite frankly, is excellent in this movie, but it just, it doesn't do the trick all the way through. And one of the problems that I have with these modern remakes and these modern reimaginings is that they are more of a historical drama than they are horror movies. Some of these, quite frankly, are not trying to be horror movies per se. They're trying to be more of a historical drama than they are trying to be horror movies. They are horrific in certain elements, but by and large, they are more of a historical drama. And this movie definitely falls into that category. Yes, there are spooky moments that happen in it, creepy moments. Yes, you get to see some really cool special effects on display there, and the villain is perhaps even more of a proper villain than he was in the original Dracula. At least he's more, you see more violence, more blood, more guts, yada yada yada, you know what I mean? But it still doesn't quite feel right. So I can kind of understand where people are coming from with that. I still think it's a pretty good movie, but I would rate this at like a 6, maybe 6.5 out of 10. And that, I'm going to go straight from that to Frankenstein. Frankenstein. Robert De Niro's Frankenstein, as you know, picked this movie up just to do this review, just so I could watch it again and check it out and see my thoughts, and see if my thoughts kind of lined up with what they originally were on this movie. I remember liking this movie a lot more than I did this time around, but I still did like it. It's just that it's got the same kind of problems that you note from Dracula. It's very much the same kind of an issue where they're trying to make it more of a historical drama than they are trying to make it a horror movie or even a gothic movie per se. There's a lot of gothic elements to this, but it's not necessarily as gothic as it could be. When I think gothic, I think the kind of stuff that Tim Burton does, quite frankly, because Tim Burton is fucking a master at that kind of stuff. You go look at Batman Returns, and there's a lot of gothic imagery in that. And I'm thinking to myself, this is made around the same time as that, and yet it fails to deliver on a lot of that same kind of gothic feeling. That being said, there are some really cool special effects in this movie. Like, there's a scene towards the end where they got some really cool practical effects on display there, and it just looks freaking fantastic and creepy and scary and gory and whoa, you know. It really kind of properly feels like it came out of the 70s and the 80s, and that's because, you know, some of the people who are working on this are probably born out of that style of filmmaking and creature effects and all that good stuff. But I mean, I like this movie. I feel like it's a decent retelling of this original story. I just have certain issues with it because it's not necessarily as horrific as maybe the first one was, or maybe the original story was, or, you know, I don't know. Just, it's too much of, it's trying to recreate too much of the historical aspect of it, or the olden times aspect of it, and not doing enough to give us that sense of the gothic that I really want to see out of a movie like this. So, I mean, by and large, good movie. I'm pretty sure it won a lot of awards. Most people consider it a really good movie, and it is. It's just, you know, I guess in terms of living up to the standard that Universal created, not necessarily as good in certain ways, but in other ways a little bit better, I would say. So I don't know what to think about that. You know, it is what it is, but whatever. What I will say is that if you want like a recreation that's closer than any other to the Universal classic monsters, particularly to the Bride of Frankenstein, Young Frankenstein, you can't go wrong with that. Mel Brooks amazingly did a really good job of just literally recreating what you saw on screen in the early Universal monster movies, but of course mocking it, mimicking it, you know, making fun of some of the cheesiness of those movies, per se. So, yeah, not bad. I really do enjoy this iteration of Frankenstein, of the Frankenstein story. But it's, you know, it is what it is. It sucks that, like, in terms of feeling more like the Universal movie, this one does a better job than this one, but then this one isn't from Universal. So it's not necessarily trying to recreate that. I mean, you know, whatever. This one I don't think is from Universal either. It's 20th Century Fox, but it's still a good movie. It's a really great movie. Hilarious. You gotta watch this one during Halloween. And given that Gene Wilder just recently passed away, of course I'm going to be watching this one. I didn't get a chance to watch it for this particular video, but you know what? It's Young Frankenstein. I've seen it before, and I know what I'm talking about when I say it's freaking hilarious and dead on in terms of recreating what the Universal Classic Monster movies did in the set creation and all that stuff, and the character, the creature design, I should say. Just really good. Now we get to The Mummy. And I recently got a comment saying maybe you should look at this in a different way. Don't look at it as a remake of the original The Mummy. Look at it as not as something that's going to be a horror movie, but as something that's more of a adventure kind of movie in the arena of Indiana Jones and those serials and all that stuff. And I can see where people are coming from with that, and I can definitely. They wear the Indiana Jones influences on their sleeve in this movie. It's obvious that they're trying to make a movie kind of like Indiana Jones. But that was kind of my problem with the movie. It didn't even do really a good job of that. I mean, there's a joke here and there that I will kind of chuckle at, but Brendan Fraser is no Harrison Ford. He is no Indiana Jones. I don't feel compelled to like this guy. I really don't. I don't feel compelled to like anything about his character. I don't feel compelled to enjoy his character in any way. It's just not interesting to me. I don't like it. And to hear the way that I actually watched one of the featurettes for a few minutes on here. And it had Stephen Sommers and somebody else who was working on the film. I think it was the producer. Stephen Sommers is the director. And they were talking about the creature effects, the design that they did for the mummy figures, for the priests in particular. And they said that when it came to the mummy, they wanted to go full CGI. They said, well, we can't do that crap. Nobody wants to see somebody walking around in bandages. We got to do full CGI. We got to do proper CGI for this character. And I'm thinking to myself, you just insulted so many fucking horror fans by saying that. Oh my goodness. You are insulting. And then they go back and when they're talking about the priests, they talked about how, well, we really wanted to pay homage to the original. So we felt like we could do that with the priests by making them actual kind of characters who are made up to look like the mummy in the original movie. And I'm just thinking, but the original movie didn't have fucking priests like that. What the fuck are you talking about saying you're trying to pay homage and pay respect to the original source material by adding in characters that weren't originally fucking there? There was one guy who kind of helped the mummy in the original movie, but there was never like a fucking priest who fucking helps him out. No, that doesn't exist. That didn't. No. But I get what they were saying. What they were actually trying to say is that by dressing these priests up like the mummy instead of the main title character, they were actually trying to pay homage just by making it kind of sort of look like the mummy from the original movie. Like that was their way of paying homage. Total shit on everybody in the audience kind of attitude about it. Like it pissed me off so much I had to turn off the freaking special feature and throw the disc back in the case and just, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to watch this again. I don't, because I don't like it. I understand it's not necessarily a bad movie, right? I can fully admit that. It's at least a 5, maybe even a 6 out of 10 in terms of quality. But in terms of like recreating the actual story of the mummy, in terms of making a horror movie or anything that even remotely reflects the mummy, they failed. They didn't make the mummy. They made Indiana Jones 4 before Indiana Jones 4 came out. No. Wrong. You failed. I can understand appreciating it for its cheese factor, but this is just, no. I don't want it. I don't want to watch it again. I have no drive to watch this again. And as you can imagine, I have no drive to watch any of the sequels either. I don't understand how so many sequels were made. But anyways, I moved on from there to watch some werewolf movies because, Universal did The Wolfman. So I decided to watch Jack Nicholson's not The Wolf, but just Wolf, And I actually really enjoyed this movie the second time around. I think honestly, the reason I liked it so much this time was because I kind of felt something for the character because I am a writer, and the character here is an editor, so I could kind of like relate to his character in a lot of ways. And I felt like they really got the gothic feel of this movie down, and actually the creature effects were done by Rick Baker in this. So, if you want to talk about really good creature effects, you don't see a whole lot of them in this movie, but when you do see them, they're really freaking good, really cool, and I loved them. What really surprised me is that the score was actually done by Ennio Morricone. Morricone did the score for freaking Wolf. I didn't even remember that. Like, what? And listening to it, I can see why I didn't remember it, because it's not that it's a bad score per se. I liked the music. It just really wasn't kind of fitting for the story that was being told. At the end, there's almost like a happy-go-lucky note to the score, and it just didn't feel like it fit the gothic, creepy, horror inspired movie that we were seeing on screen. So, yeah, I don't know. I did like the movie though. I felt like it was a really good modern telling of a horror icon of the Wolfman, of the werewolf. I feel like in a lot of ways that's what they should be doing with modern retellings. Whereas with these, they try to go back in time and tell you the story from the perspective of the people at that time, and then fail to actually get the people who are acting out the people of that time to properly act like they are from that time period. you know Unlike that, these movies are modern. They take you into a modern setting, a late 80s early 90s setting here, and tell you the story from the perspective of somebody who lives in that time period, because they know what people in that time period are like, and they don't make stupid mistakes with that because they are in that time period when they made this. So yeah, uh, I like when they do modern retellings. I think they can do a good job of it a lot of the time. Just most of the time they don't do a good job of it. So yeah, it's nice to see when they do a pretty good job of it. And this one I feel like is a pretty damn good example of that. Now, as for the Wolfman, I know a lot of people here. A lot of people watching this video are going to say, oh, he hated it, didn't he? He hated it. I loved this movie. I freaking loved The Wolfman. You've got Rick Baker doing the special effects, the practical effects in this movie, and they are so freaking good. Whereas he didn't do a whole lot of work in this, he does a ton of work in this. You got Anthony Hopkins doing his best freaking work. Benicio del Toro does a really good job in the main role. I loved it. If you want to talk about how to properly remake a Universal horror movie, I feel like this is the way to do it. Granted, it was a lot more violent, and in terms of like the violence, they definitely pulled that more from the 60s through 80s kind of horror movies that we saw coming up at around that time, right? But I feel like that was majorly due to Rick Baker being on board. Rick Baker probably had something to say about the kind of violence that was happening on set. I'm sure the studios wanted to see it too, but in some small way, these filmmakers are informed by, I feel like, 80s horror and how graphically violent it was, because they feel like that's what audiences want to see now, especially horror audiences. And they're not wrong per se. I actually did like that about it, but I will say that's something that you're not going to find in the original Universal movie. And yes, they do take more of a historical drama approach to this, but they actually did it right in this case, I feel like, because in addition to it being a historical drama in a lot of senses, it's also a very gothic. They got the gothic stuff down really freaking well, and the creature effects were spot on, and the violence, it was a lot more of a scary movie, of a wide-eyed, whoa, what the hell is even going on here kind of scary movie than anything like Frankenstein or Dracula were in the 90s. So I actually really liked this movie. I really appreciated what they tried to do with it. And I can see myself watching this a lot more in years to come. It's so much fun. It's really, really good movie. I don't know why people shit on it. Last but not least, let's take a moment to appreciate movies that were based on The Invisible Man. Now, of course, there's nothing that per se is like directly inspired by the Invisible Man as created by Universal, but there were a lot of movies that were inspired by The Invisible Man. They just kind of wore their influences on their sleeve. They didn't actually kind of mention it by name. And this, I feel like, is definitely one of those movies. Darkman. Great freaking movie. Apparently this is a movie that Sam Raimi made when they wouldn't let him do Batman. So, yes, it's very much a superhero movie. And you can tell it from the fact that he got Danny Elfman to do the score. And it sounds like Batman, quite frankly. But that being said, the character himself, I mean, you see the bandages, and the coat that he's wearing and everything, it looks like the Invisible Man in a lot of ways. Or the Shadow, you could even say, in a lot of ways. If you look at the character creation behind this guy, he's a scientist, like the Invisible Man, who was working on something like a new breakthrough, like the Invisible Man was. Something happened, a terrible accident happened, like the Invisible Man, and now he has to basically put on a fake mask, a fake, version of his face or other faces in order to actually go out in public, which is similar to what you see the Invisible Man doing, putting on clothes and trying to make it look like there's nothing wrong there. You know what I mean? So, in a lot of ways, Darkman is inspired by the Invisible Man, and I don't think that's deniable because there are just so many elements of his character that are from the Invisible Man. Yeah, I really like Darkman still to this day. It's such a good movie. Really well shot, really well acted, and it proves that Sam Raimi should have been given a shot at Batman. Could you imagine the last two Batman movies in the 90s, Batman Returns, or not Batman Returns, I'm sorry, Batman and Robin and Batman Forever, I think it is? Could you imagine those two movies having been directed by Sam Raimi instead of Joel Schumacher? Holy crap, that would have been awesome. You can't deny that would have been awesome. You watch this movie and tell me that wouldn't have been awesome. It would have been awesome. The other movie that I like to watch that's kind of like, or inspired by The Invisible Man, of course, is Memoirs of an Invisible Man. This I got recently, actually, if you remember correctly, if you've been watching my videos. Paid like 15 freaking bucks for it just to get it because this is the only way you can get it on DVD and it's out of print, and yeah. This one was directed by John Carpenter, and you can tell he has a love for that original Invisible Man movie. And they even did the special effects in pretty much the same way. There are some improvements that they made, granted, but the special effects are pretty much done the exact same way. The story is not exactly the same. It's a modernized version, kind of like how Wolf is a modernized version. But it's kind of like a mix between Wolf and Young Frankenstein, to be quite frank, because this, of course, is more of a mock version of The Invisible Man. It's a comedy version of The Invisible Man. And I do like that about it. I like this movie quite a bit. So, yeah. There also, in terms of The Invisible Man, is the Hollow Man series. I don't have that on Blu-ray. I'll probably get it at some point. I remember thinking Hollow Man was okay, but not great. I have not seen Hollow Man 2. But, yeah, that would be, I think, an example of trying to tell the same story in a modern setting a lot, in much the same way that Wolfman did. But, I don't know. I feel like it didn't work as well. But I haven't seen it in so long that I might be wrong about that. I might need to rewatch those and get a proper appreciation and see if, did they get something wrong here? Did they get it right? Well, I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Which of these movies is your favorite? Which of the remakes and reimaginings is your favorite? And which ones do you hate? Which ones do you love? Which ones did I miss? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll catch you later. Peace.